The first thing I smelled wasn't roasting meat or pine-scented candles. It was smoke. Paper smoke. And my mother stood in the backyard, the college letters I'd painstakingly gathered clutched in one hand, a lighter in the other. My father, on the porch, just laughed. "Save the money for your brother," he'd said, as if my AP score was some kind of adorable oopsie. The flames danced, devouring my applications, my payments, my bills, everything I'd worked so hard to hide from them. I didn't scream. I just watched. Because 6 months later, that same phone would ring at Thanksgiving, and when Mom answered, she'd whisper, "You mean my son in our house?" Preston's chair was always the first pulled out at the kitchen table. Always at the head, even though Dad insisted no one had assigned seats. His plate always got the bigger piece of chicken. His coffee cup was refilled before he even looked up. His problems? Family emergencies. Mine? Character building. The Willow house looked normal from the street. White siding, a perfectly manicured lawn, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs Mom never actually sat in. Every fall, she'd hang a wreath, light pine candles before guests arrived, as if the scent alone could convince everyone we were warm and welcoming inside. I learned early on that peace in that house meant needing nothing. Absolutely nothing. If Preston forgot his homework, Mom would drive it to school, no questions asked. If Preston quit soccer after Dad had already bought all the gear, nobody dared mention the cost. If Preston wanted a car, Dad called it an investment. But when I asked about college visits, Mom's mouth would tighten, like I'd just brought up a bill we couldn't possibly afford. "You're smart," she'd say, her voice thin. "You'll figure something out." That wasn't a compliment, though. It was a door quietly, firmly locked. By the time I turned 18, I'd become a master of hiding hope. I wrote essays after midnight, my bedroom door cracked just enough to hear footsteps. I'd ask teachers for recommendation letters before school even started, just to avoid anyone at home seeing the envelopes. I'd check admissions messages on an ancient laptop, balanced precariously on my knees, the screen dimmed so low it felt like I was doing something shameful. My name is Jade Willow. But back then, in that house, nobody ever said my name like it belonged to anything important. Then the AP score came. I printed it at school. I needed to feel the paper in my hands, something real, something tangible that Dad couldn't just wave away with one of his jokes. That evening, the kitchen smelled of overcooked roast and Mom's potent lemon cleaner. Preston was leaning back in his chair, scrolling endlessly on his phone. Dad sat with his coffee mug beside him, cold and untouched. I placed the score report on the table. For one tiny, fleeting second, I let myself imagine his face changing. Dad picked it up, glanced at the number, and then he laughed. Not a proud laugh. A dismissive one. Then he looked past me, directly at Preston, and said, "Save the money for your brother." Dad's laugh lingered in the kitchen long after the sound itself had faded. It settled between the plates, a silent accusation. It followed me down the hall. It made the paper in my hand feel utterly stupid, childish, like I'd brought home a crayon drawing from kindergarten instead of a score most kids would have wept over. Preston never even looked up from his phone. Mom did, though. Her eyes flickered from the score report to me, then to Dad's untouched coffee mug. She didn't smile. She didn't defend me. She just meticulously folded a dish towel over the oven handle, her hands moving slowly, tightly. "Your brother needs support right now," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "For what?" I managed to ask. Preston finally looked up. Dad leaned back, his posture radiating impatience. "Don't start, Jade." That was the unspoken rule in our house. If I asked a question, I was starting something. If Preston demanded money, or attention, or rides, or chances, or forgiveness, he was just figuring life out. So, I stopped asking out loud. I kept applying. I wrote essays with my headphones on, no music playing, just so I could hear if someone approached my door. I hid letters under piles of sweaters. I saved admissions messages in folders with deliberately boring names. When a scholarship office requested payments and bills, I scanned what I could at the school library and sent everything off before Mom could possibly notice. For a few weeks, I honestly thought I had built a wall, a door they couldn't see through. Then, one Thursday, I came home and smelled it through the kitchen window. Not dinner smoke. Paper smoke. The backyard grass was still damp from the morning rain. My shoes sank into it as I ran outside. Mom stood beside the old metal fire pit, wearing her good cardigan, the one she saved for parent-teacher meetings. In her hand was a thick stack of papers, university logos bleeding into scholarship records, payments, bills, my name printed clearly across the top. "Mom," I said, but my voice came out like a thin thread. She dropped the first stack into the flame. The edges caught with an unnerving speed. I lunged forward, but Dad stepped off the porch, blocking my path. "Don't be dramatic," he stated, his voice flat. Eleanor didn't even raise her voice. "You are not leaving this family behind. I earned those. You hid those. They're mine." Her face remained utterly impassive. "Your brother matters right now." The fire cracked softly, a sound like tiny bones breaking. Preston stood behind the screen door, half hidden, watching just enough to know he was the reason for all this, but not enough to feel any real responsibility. I could have screamed. I could have lunged again, grabbed those papers and burned my own hands. Instead, I looked past the inferno in the backyard, through the kitchen window, to my old laptop upstairs, still holding every single message she couldn't touch. I picked up one blackened corner from the grass, ash smearing across my fingertips, and in that moment, I stopped begging them to see me. The motel desk had a burn mark on it, shaped like a crescent moon. I set my backpack on top of it and emptied out everything I had left. 2 shirts, a toothbrush, my birth certificate, a few crumpled dollars, and the APT score report, one corner bent from my hand gripping it too hard. Then I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim room, brighter than the flickering motel sign outside. I created 2 folders. One for what they had said, what they had done. One for what I could prove. Admissions messages, scholarship records, payments, bills. Screenshots of Mom's frantic texts telling me college would tear the family apart. A message from Dad, stark and cold, saying Preston needed a real chance, like mine had been some kind of pretend opportunity. I saved everything twice. Then I called the admissions office from the payphone near the ice machine, my cell plan nearly dead. I kept my voice steady, explaining that some of my printed paperwork had been unfortunately destroyed at home. The woman on the other end didn't gasp or offer pity. She just gave me steps. Steps were so much easier than feelings. Request replacement records. Confirm scholarship status. Update mailing address. Secure personal documents. I scribbled every instruction on the back of a motel receipt. That first week, I ate noodles from a paper cup and slept with my backpack tucked protectively under my arm. I took early morning shifts at a diner off a wide road outside Springfield. Then I folded clearance sweaters at a department store until closing. My feet ached so badly I'd sit on the bathroom floor before showering, because just standing felt like a personal assault. Some nights, Dad's voice would echo back. "You'll be fine anywhere." It sounded different now, when anywhere was a room with a broken chain lock and carpet that smelled faintly of old rain. But I didn't go back. A high school counselor connected me with an emergency student program. A manager at the diner let me pick up extra shifts. One afternoon, an older woman in a navy coat came in, ordered black coffee, and watched me, between tables, meticulously rewriting a scholarship appeal. "You always work like somebody's chasing you," she asked, her voice gentle. I looked at the name on the card she handed me. Beatrice Stone. My grandmother. She didn't hug me in the diner. She didn't make a scene. She just sat in the last booth and said quietly, "Your mother told me you were being ungrateful." I waited for the judgment. Instead, Grandma slid a plain envelope across the table. Inside was cash, not a fortune, but just enough to breathe, and a note in her neat, familiar handwriting. "Do not spend this proving them wrong. Spend it keeping yourself safe." That was the first money I accepted without feeling instantly owned by it. Over the next few months, I rebuilt what Mom had tried so desperately to turn into ash. New records, a new address, new passwords, a new bank account, a new silence. Not the silence they had trained into me, but the kind I actively chose. By Thanksgiving, I had a tiny room, a campus deferral, and a folder full of proof. When Mom texted, inviting me to dinner, I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then, I packed the folder securely in my bag. The phone rang just as Dad lifted the carving knife. One sharp buzz from the kitchen counter. Then another. The sound cut through the clink of silverware, through the cloying warmth of the Thanksgiving candles, through Mom's carefully rehearsed little speech about how nice it was to have everyone under one roof again. No one had uttered the word sorry. Not Dad, not Mom, not Preston, who sat in his usual chair, wearing a new watch and acting as if I were a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. I'd been there for 40 minutes, and already Mom had called Preston sweetheart 6 times. She asked if he needed more mashed potatoes, if the gravy was warm enough, if the internship he wanted had called back. When her eyes finally met mine, they slid past my face, landing on my coat. "Still staying downtown?" she asked. "For now." Dad snorted. "Sounds expensive." I set my fork down. Less expensive than having my future burned in a fire pit. The knife stopped dead against the turkey. Mom's mouth tightened. "This is Thanksgiving." "Exactly," I said. "I thought we were naming what we were thankful for." Preston muttered, "Here we go." That was when the phone buzzed again. Mom reached for it too quickly, as if grateful for any distraction that could pull the room away from me. She turned slightly toward the sink. "Hello." Her shoulders changed first. They went rigid under her cream sweater. Then her hand tightened around the phone. "Yes," she said. "This is Eleanor Willow." Dad watched her. Preston watched his plate. I watched the color drain from her face in slow, deliberate inches, from her cheeks to her lips. "Grandchild," Mom repeated, the word landing with more force than any thrown object. She blinked. And for one strange, fleeting second, she looked almost hopeful. Then she whispered, "You mean my son?" I felt my fingers clench around the folder in my bag. The voice on the other end kept talking. Mom didn't answer for a long moment. Her eyes moved to Preston, then to Dad, and finally to me. Not with love, but with stark, unadulterated fear. "We'll be there," she said. The lawyer's office was downtown, perched above a bank with tinted windows that reflected the gray sky. The lobby smelled sharply of floor polish, sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the fake warmth of our Thanksgiving table. Dr. Evans, a woman with kind eyes behind severe glasses, met us in a conference room. A gleaming glass table stood in the center, and on it, a single, unassuming plain envelope. Dad stomped in, bristling with anger. That was his armor, his go-to reaction when fear gnawed at him. "Let's just clear this up quickly," he declared, his voice booming a little too loudly in the quiet room. "If Beatrice left something for Preston, we can manage it as a family." Dr. Evans looked at him, coolly, over the rim of her spectacles. "Mrs. Stone did not leave her estate to Preston." Preston's head snapped up. I saw his jaw clench, a mirror of my mother's hand gripping the edge of her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Dr. Evans opened a folder, her movements deliberate. "Before I read the distribution, Mrs. Stone requested that this statement be acknowledged." Her gaze shifted, finally settling on me. "Jade, your grandmother was well aware that your college applications, scholarship records, payments, and bills were destroyed by your mother." Eleanor inhaled sharply, a sound like tearing fabric. That is not before she could finish, before she could spin another one of her carefully crafted lies. I opened my own folder. I slid my copies across the polished glass table. My APT score, admissions messages, scholarship records, screenshots of Dad's message about saving resources for Preston, Mom's text saying college would tear the family apart. No shouting, no begging, just paper. Just undeniable proof. Dr. Evans looked at the documents, then back at my parents, her expression unreadable. That aligns perfectly with what Mrs. Stone provided. Dad's face hardened, the anger solidifying into something colder, more dangerous. "This is family business." He practically spat the words. "No," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. It became evidence when she lit the match. The conference room went cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the chill of truth, exposed and undeniable. Dr. Evans continued, her voice unwavering. "The entirety of Mrs. Stone's estate is left to Jade Willow. Funds, investments, and personal property are to be transferred under the protections outlined here." Preston pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. "Grandma wouldn't do that," he practically yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She did," Dr. Evans replied, calmly, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. Dad leaned forward, his eyes burning into mine. "We contest it." Dr. Evans simply turned one more page in her folder. "If any named family member contests the will or attempts to pressure Jade into transferring assets, all remaining consideration is forfeited. All communication regarding the estate will go through this office." Mom finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like forever. "Jade," she said softly, her voice an unfamiliar whisper. "We're still family." I picked up Grandma Beatrice's envelope, the plain white paper a stark contrast to the chaos in the room. "You burned that word in the backyard," I told her, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. And this time, in that silent, frozen room, nobody laughed. Consequences, I learned, arrived in plain envelopes. Not dramatic ones with flashing lights or shouting on the porch for the neighbors to watch through their blinds. Just crisp, white envelopes with Dr. Evans's office address in the corner, sliding into mailboxes and landing on kitchen counters. They were facts, undeniable and cold, things nobody could burn away. The first one informed Dad that all estate questions, all communication regarding Grandma Beatrice's wishes, had to go through the attorney. No more bluster, no more dismissive jokes. The second one told Mom she was not to contact me about money, property, or family arrangements. The carefully constructed facade of our family was not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces. The third envelope went to Preston. And I heard about that one directly from him. He called me 6 days after Thanksgiving. My phone buzzed, a name I hadn't seen in months flashing across the screen. I almost didn't answer. My finger hovered, hesitating, before I finally pressed accept. He didn't say hello. "You really did this," he demanded, his voice tight with accusation. I was standing in my tiny apartment kitchen, holding a mug of coffee with both hands, the warmth seeping into my cold fingers. Rain tapped a soft, rhythmic beat against the window over the sink. "I didn't write Grandma's will, Preston." "No," he snapped, "but you're letting it happen." That sentence almost made me laugh. It was such a quintessential Preston statement, so utterly lacking in self-awareness. But the sound that escaped me was more like air leaving my chest, a weary exhalation. "You let Mom burn my college applications." He went quiet. Not sorry quiet. Not apologetic. It was a cornered quiet, the kind that came when he knew he had nowhere left to run. "I didn't light the match," he mumbled, a weak defense. "No," I agreed, my voice steady. "You just warmed your hands over it." After that, he stopped calling. His calls went straight to voicemail, then eventually stopped altogether. Dad tried once, from a number I didn't recognize. He left a long, rambling message about responsibility, about family reputation, about how I was making my mother sick with stress. He sounded desperate, a tone I'd never heard from him before. I simply forwarded the entire message, voice and all, to Dr. Evans. My job wasn't to argue with him anymore. It was just to send evidence. Mom didn't call. Instead, a few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a Thanksgiving photo from years ago. All four of us at the old Willow House table, Preston grinning, Dad holding the carving knife aloft, ready to slice the turkey. Mom's hand rested on my shoulder, a possessive gesture, as if it were proof she had loved me in public, when someone had a camera out. There was no note. Not a single word. I turned the photo over. My pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote one single sentence on the blank back. "A picture is not an apology." Then, I put it in the same folder as everything else. My evidence. My proof. I did use Grandma Beatrice's money. But not in the way they imagined, not to flaunt or to prove a point to them. I used it to pay the school balance I still owed. I accepted the place I had deferred, the one they tried to erase. I rented a quiet room near campus with a lock that actually worked and a window that caught the morning light, letting in sun instead of just rain. I bought a used desk, 2 lamps, and a sturdy filing box, one that could survive more than someone else's temper. Later, when I was stable, when the constant hum of anxiety had finally quieted to a low thrum, I started a small scholarship in Grandma Beatrice's name. Nothing flashy, nothing that needed a grand announcement. Just help for girls who had good grades, no safety net, and families that called their dreams selfish. The first acceptance letter I helped fund came on thick, cream-colored paper. I held it for a long time, feeling the weight of it, the promise of it, before carefully slipping it into an envelope and mailing it out. My apartment was quiet that morning. No laughter from the porch, no lighter clicking open, no one saying Preston needed more. Just the gentle scent of coffee, the soft tap of rain, and paper that finally meant possibility instead of loss. I placed Grandma Beatrice's last letter, the one Dr. Evans had given me, beside my keys in my desk drawer and closed it gently. I used to think ashes meant the end of something. That when something was burned, it was gone forever, irretrievable. Now, I know they can mark the place where you stopped kneeling. They mark the spot where the old version of you was consumed, and the new one rose from the embers, stronger and unyielding. If your family only loves you when you are useful, quiet, or willing to disappear, that isn't love you have to earn. That is control, dressed up in a pretty family photo and tied with a bow of obligation. I don't hate Preston. I don't even hate my parents, Eleanor and my father. But I will never hand them another match and call it peace. Grandma Beatrice's letter still sits in my drawer beside my keys. Some mornings, before work, I open it just to see her neat handwriting and remember one simple truth. They burned the papers. But they did not burn the girl who wrote them. But they did not burn the girl who wrote them. And that, I've learned, is the most critical truth I carry. They tried to burn my future, my potential, the proof of my worth, but the girl, the core of me, the one who dreamed and worked and hoped in secret, she was made of something much more resilient than paper. She was made of stubbornness, of quiet defiance, of a burning need to simply be. That need didn't disappear with the smoke. Instead, it became a furnace inside me, fueling every step. Every class I attended, every assignment I completed, every single morning I woke up in my quiet campus room, I felt that internal fire. It wasn't hate, not exactly. It was clarity. A sharp, undeniable understanding of what true love wasn't. My parents' version of love, it was conditional. It was a tight embrace that suffocated, a pat on the head that kept you small. It was a contract where I was expected to be useful, to be quiet, to be willing to disappear so that Preston could shine brighter, so that their carefully constructed image of our family wouldn't be disturbed. My successes were inconvenient. My desires were selfish. My very existence, outside the role they had assigned me, was a threat. And that realization, that bitter pill, was harder to swallow than any physical pain. It forced me to look at every memory, every compliment, every sacrifice from their perspective, and see the threads of control woven through them all. I remember thinking, after Dr. Evans laid out Grandma Beatrice's will, that the relief I felt was a betrayal. How could I feel relief when my own mother was being confronted, when my father looked so utterly bewildered and angry? But it wasn't a betrayal. It was the loosening of a knot I hadn't even known was tied around my chest for 18 years. It was the first breath that truly expanded my lungs, unburdened by the weight of their expectations. It was freedom, stark and uncompromising. The scholarship I started, the Beatrice Stone Legacy Fund, it wasn't just about financial aid. It was about creating a lifeline I never had. It was about telling those girls, in the quietest, most powerful way possible, that their dreams weren't selfish. That their intelligence wasn't a burden. That their ambition wasn't something to be hidden or apologized for. When I read their applications, their stories often echoed my own, tales of invisible struggles, of parents who couldn't see past their own narrow worlds, of futures almost extinguished before they could even spark. Each acceptance letter I helped send felt like a small victory, a quiet act of rebellion against the forces that tried to hold us all down. It was a promise kept, not just to Grandma Beatrice, but to the girl I used to be. Campus life itself became a slow unraveling of all the careful ways I had learned to shrink. I found my voice in discussion groups, not just to answer questions, but to challenge, to debate, to explore. I made friends who saw me, truly saw Jade, not just Preston's sister or my parents' inconvenient daughter. They saw my intelligence, my humor, my passion. They didn't try to dim my light so theirs could be brighter. They cheered me on and I, in turn, cheered for them. It was a revelation, this reciprocal, unconditional support. It felt like learning a new language after speaking in whispers my whole life. Sometimes, a wave of melancholy would still wash over me, a phantom limb ache for the family I'd wanted, the one that never truly existed. I'd see other students call their parents, laughing easily into their phones, or talk about going home for a weekend visit, and a pang would hit. But those moments became fewer and farther between. The sharp edges of the past dulled, replaced by the quiet hum of my present. My life, rich with my studies, my work, my new friendships, and the growing impact of the Beatrice Stone Legacy Fund, felt full in a way it never had before. I've never looked back with regret. Not for a second. The boundaries I set are not walls built of hate, but fences built of self-preservation. My life now is a testament to the truth that some relationships, no matter how deeply rooted in biology, are fundamentally unhealthy. And walking away, choosing your own path, is not abandonment, it is choosing to live. Preston still calls sometimes, but not often. Mostly it's when he needs something, a favor, advice on something outside his usual circle. He still acts as if the past is a misunderstanding, easily forgotten. I answer civilly, maintain a distant politeness, but I don't offer more than I'm comfortable giving. There's no bitterness, just a quiet understanding that our paths diverged irrevocably the day he stood behind that screen door, watching. He never apologized, not truly, and I stopped waiting for it. An apology would only mean something if it came with understanding, and I don't think he, or my parents, ever truly understood what they tried to do. Eleanor and my father. They've tried to reach out through various channels, mostly through distant relatives or vague, non-committal letters that smell faintly of desperation and a desire for things to simply revert to how they were. But things could never revert. The silence between us, the one I chose, is loud. It's a powerful statement. It tells them, without a single word, that I am no longer available for their control, no longer willing to be their convenient prop. The consequences of their actions are not a temporary inconvenience for me. They are the permanent landscape of our relationship. There's a strength in that quiet. A peace that doesn't require me to sacrifice myself. I learned that from Grandma Beatrice. Her legacy wasn't just money, it was the quiet courage to see the truth and act on it. It was the permission to reclaim my own story. The morning light streams through my window as I sip my coffee, the scent of fresh pages from my textbooks filling the air. It's a different kind of morning now. No longer defined by fear or the need to hide. Just the gentle rhythm of my own life, built brick by careful brick. Grandma Beatrice's letter is still in my drawer, beside my keys. I don't need to open it every morning, but sometimes I do. Just to feel the texture of the paper, to trace the elegant loops of her handwriting, and to remember that simple, immutable truth. They burned the papers. But they could not burn the girl who wrote them. And the girl who wrote them is still here, still writing her own story, every single day. And this story, my story, is far from over. If you've ever felt like you were asked to shrink, to make yourself smaller so someone else could shine brighter, so their ego could remain intact, I want to hear from you. What did you do? How did you find your own light? Share your story, your insights, your journey in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, if you found strength in Jade's story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. And this story, my story, is far from over. The years that followed my enrollment at university were a quiet triumph. I didn't just attend classes, I devoured them. Every late night in the library, every challenging paper, every collaboration with fellow students who saw me as Jade, not just Preston's sister or Eleanor's daughter, was a step further away from the smoke-filled backyard. I majored in financial literacy and nonprofit management, a direct nod to the practical skills I had learned in the motel room and the profound impact of Grandma Beatrice's gift. I graduated with honors, a framed diploma now hanging proudly in my small, sunlit apartment, a stark contrast to the burning papers that had once been my future. The Beatrice Stone Legacy Fund grew steadily, fueled by a deep-seated desire to be the safety net I never had. We started small, just a handful of scholarships each year, but the impact was immeasurable. I remember the first time I met a young woman named Clara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope, clutching an acceptance letter from a small liberal arts college. Her family, much like mine, saw her academic ambitions as a drain on resources, a selfish pursuit. When I handed her the check, her hand trembled. "You don't understand," she whispered. "My dad said I was dreaming too big." I understood perfectly. Her tears weren't just for the money, they were for the validation, the belief that someone, finally, saw her worth beyond what she could offer to others. Watching Clara flourish in college, seeing her send me updates about her classes and her new friends, was a joy deeper than anything I ever imagined. It wasn't about proving my parents wrong, it was about building something right. My chosen silence with Eleanor and my father solidified over time. There were a few more attempts at contact, always indirect, always tinged with a thinly veiled expectation of reconciliation on their terms. A Christmas card from Eleanor, years after the will was read, contained a picture of Preston and his new family, a baby nestled in his arms, with a small, almost illegible note, "We miss you." It was a calculated move, an attempt to tug at the familial heartstrings, to paint me as the outsider. But the card felt hollow. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the past, just a silent demand for me to return to the script they had written. I didn't send it to Dr. Evans this time. I simply placed it in the folder, not out of anger, but as a quiet record of how little had truly changed in their perception. My boundaries were not a punishment, they were the consequence of their actions, and my firm refusal to be hurt by them again. The biggest shift, I realized, wasn't just in my circumstances, but in my own heart. The anger, once a hot, consuming fire, had cooled into a profound sense of self-possession. I was no longer defined by what they took from me, but by what I had built for myself and for others. The ashes of my past weren't a scar, they were the fertile ground from which something new and beautiful had grown. Grandma Beatrice's letter still sits in my drawer, beside my keys, but I don't need to open it as often anymore. The truth it contained is now etched into my very being. They burned the papers, but they could not burn the girl who wrote them. And that girl, the one who rose from the ashes, is not just surviving, she is thriving, a testament to the fact that some fires, though meant to destroy, can instead forge an unyielding strength. And that, my friends, is Jade's story. It's a journey from invisibility to power, from silence to a voice that helps others. Many of us have faced moments where we felt unseen, unheard, or asked to diminish ourselves for someone else's comfort. Have you ever felt like you had to choose between your dreams and your family's expectations? How did you navigate that impossible choice, and what did you learn about your own resilience? Share your experiences, your triumphs, and your insights in the comments below. And if Jade's journey resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of recognition or renewed your own strength, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what incredible stories we uncover next.